Mr. and Mrs. By my last year in art school, I was a fully prepared performance artist, ready to go out and make work professionally, indeed, to live the life of a performance artist full time. For my final degree show in Cardiff, I decided what I would do was try and make an appearance on the television game show called Mr. and Mrs. I would do this with my partner at the time, Mary, and would then record that game show on video and present it as part of my final exhibition. At the time, I was dealing with ideas around and to do with the subject of normality. What was acceptable, normal behaviour, and what was not? The Mr. and Mrs. quiz show presented me with the opportunity to explore these ideas further. I wanted to appear on the show as an acceptable person, as if you like, Mr. Normal, but at the same time test the audience as my behaviour was unusual and my clothing distinctly odd. The line between what is acceptable and what is not. In a sense, I walked the line of paradox and recorded it to be played back at my degree show. The idea of the show was to find out how well couples knew each other. The structure was that the man was asked 3 questions about the woman and the woman was asked 3 questions about the man. Whilst the questions were being asked, one partner was locked in a booth in order not to hear the other's answer. Then he or she was removed from the booth and asked the same set of questions, hopefully giving identical answers. You then would win money for every question you got right, and finally you got a candelabra. And a signed photograph with you stood there with the compere of the show and his pretty assistant. So in front of a live audience, banal questions were asked such as, who makes breakfast in the morning, you or your partner? In your record collection, do you know if he prefers mainly classical or pop music? So they were very simple questions, but tricky answers were sought. Mary and I accepted and appeared on the television show. My intention was to make a recording of it on video and then broadcast it sometime later. I appeared in a rather strange-looking grey suit. I called it the suit of normality. I made sure that my behaviour was particularly peculiar and oddball. I presented my occupation as a designer. The recording took place in a TV studio in front of a live audience in Bristol. People appearing on the show invited their family and friends as guests who dutifully sat, clapped, smiled and laughed at the answers to the questions either failed or correctly answered. As we entered the studio, we were shown to seats at the back of a rather tacky set. Flat painted boards were held together with G-clamps and masking tape. Bits of wood were strung together. It looked awful in the flesh. I was a little anxious and thought that we needed to keep ourselves in check. Too much of an obvious wrong move, for example, trying to be over normal, would be suspicious, and indeed being too eccentric in my behaviour would appear too much, and our part may well be edited out of the programme. It was a difficult tightrope to tread. The whole thing was recorded, pre-recorded, edited and distributed at a later stage as a mini-series shown each week on a certain evening of the week. This was a programme that would not upset your granny or granddad, and indeed would bring a small smile to a certain generation's face. Getting the action correct for the recording was a little tough, as we were introduced to our host, i.e. our compere for the evening. He was fine, but certainly did not like the cut of my suit. It was a specially designed and tailored, over-exaggerated grey suit, with very wide flared trousers and wide sharp cut lapels. It looked quite crazy, but just about acceptable within the terms of what I describe as normality. It seemed that throughout the show the compere was slightly nervous and fidgety. He had twigged that things didn't quite appear right or feel correct. My behaviour was purposely at odds with that of the other participants. My walk, facial expressions, actions and intonations were just a little off kilter. My overall aim for the appearance was to try and get an equal number of questions right and wrong. And we achieved it. We got 3 questions correct and 3 questions wrong. For this we received £15 in cash and that rather cheap, nasty-looking candelabra. At the end of the show we had a photograph taken of ourselves alongside the monocled compere and his sexy blonde lady's sidekick. As a programme, Mr and Mrs was typical of that period and remained very popular for some years, with different versions featuring different frontmen comparing the show. In a way, it was a rather watered-down version of popular culture, reality TV, that was to come much later. As planned, I recorded the show and presented it at my final degree show as a videotape shown on a television set with a candelabra and its photographs sometime later. The external examiner was an abstract painter of some renown. He walked into my exhibition and the first thing he said was, "Well, the television is on, but where are the paintings?" And of course, there weren't any paintings. There was the recording of Mr and Mrs, me appearing on it, and I in the flesh was outside in my bath on top of my Morris 1000 van, reciting the lines of my Morris 1000 dancing poetry. He thought I'd just left the television switched on. He suggested to the staff that he couldn't find my artwork, so I was failed.